Today we're at the Franklin County Historical Society here in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. My name is Neil Wrench and I am presently the president of the Historical Society. The Franklin County Historical Society is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of Franklin County, PA. The Society operates a museum, a genealogy library, a gift shop, and a website that showcases the local heritage and culture here in Franklin County. The Society also publishes newsletters, books, and journals that feature historical research and stories. Members will have access to members-only website, which is franklinhistorical.org. That is franklinhistorical.org, which includes a free subscription to Franklin County own newspaper.com. This will include 1 million pages of newspapers for Chambersburg, Waynesboro, Greencastle, Mercersburg, and Scotland, with papers ranging from 1793 to the year 2020. The Society also provides an annual event called the Haunted Jail, which happens during Halloween period. Bus trips are also offered here to the Historical Society throughout the year, and all these events are advertised on our website. The old jail also has been a popular spot for paranormal investigations. We are very active with the Historical Society within South Central Pennsylvania, and we're always looking for volunteers to help in our genealogy library, give tours, and help out in many of our events. If you're interested in volunteering, you can call 717-263-1667. So now let's just enter the jail.
I'm Joyce Hurst. I'm a longtime docent here at the old jail, and I would like to welcome you to Chambersburg and to the old jail. Our jail was built in 1818, so we're now well over 200 years old. It functioned as the Franklin County Jail for 152 years, closing in 1970. And we believe that this is the longest continuously used jail in Pennsylvania. Also located here is the Franklin County Historic Society. On the second floor are our offices and our genealogy library. As we explore the 3 floors of this building, and this is a big building, yes, you're going to see jail cells, but you're also going to see museum items, history pertaining to Franklin County. So we're going to start here with this door. It's a very hefty door. It's 2-ply, held together with iron straps, and you'll see the large key here, which of course is the original, but then it still works. We don't like to demonstrate it anymore because we don't want it to wear out. So I think with that introduction, I would like to move to the next room, to the parlor. Okay, so we've moved into the parlor of the old jail. Now you're thinking, why would there be a parlor in the old jail? Well, the sheriff was the guy who was in charge of operating the jail. And so if you were the sheriff, you and your family had to live here. And so this was your living room, or they may have called it the parlor. Most everything we have in here belongs to the Chambers family. Ben Chambers was the man who settled here, he and his family, about 1730. And that was just about 2 blocks from here, down by the Falling Spring, which also flows into the Conicajig Creek. He had a grist mill, but it wasn't then until about 1764 that he encouraged other people to move here and divided the area into lots and became a town or village at that time. We have things here in the case pertaining to those dividing of the lots, and also the deed from the Chambers family. But we have 2 painted pictures of the original Ben Chambers, and I say the original because every generation had a Benjamin. But of course we didn't have cameras back in those days, so they're painted pictures, and we have one of his wife Jane. Other pictures in the case are Chambers family members. We also have silver over here in the case that belong to the Chambers family, and some other items in this room came down through the Chambers family. We're now in the kitchen of the old jail, the kitchen used by the sheriff's family. And later on there was a more modern kitchen, but we've taken it back to what might have looked like in the original days when the cooking and the heat source would have been the fireplace. So we have lots of items in here that pertain to a kitchen. If you were to visit here, you might notice that there are no bars on the windows in this part of the building because it was living quarters. Every place where you see bars, that means there were prisoners. And so there are lots of areas where there were prisoners. I've thought already about how much wood or coal it would have taken to keep all these fireplaces going. You'll notice that the chimneys are double, and so you have a fireplace on either side of the wall, and there are quite a few fireplaces throughout the building. But then again, I thought, oh, well, they had free labor. I'm sure they took the prisoners out and collected the wood and carried it in here, or perhaps brought the coal in to keep all these fireplaces going. I'd like to point out just a couple of items. This one, we were told, is a popcorn popper. You would hold it over the fire and spin it, and it was also told that no, it was to roast coffee beans. Well, I suppose it could be used for a number of things, to roast chestnuts, to roast peanuts, popcorn, whatever. Pretty nice item. Up here we have a Betty lamp. The German word was besser, which meant better, and so it made a better light than candles, and so it was nicknamed the Betty lamp. It was portable, it could be carried around. It burned whale oil or animal fat for the source of the heat. We're in the apothecary of the old jail. Why would a jail have an apothecary? Well, it wasn't always here. This was the room that we're told was the doctor's examining room, that if an inmate needed to be seen by a doctor was called in, the inmate was brought here to be attended to. But what we have in here is mostly all medically related for that reason, and a lot of what we have in this area came from an old drugstore down on South Main Street, just 2 blocks away from here. Lots of bottles, lots of things that were used in an apothecary. I'll point out just a couple of them. Over here in the windows we have urns with colored water that are called show globes. That was the symbol for the apothecary, similar to the barber stripe pole outside the barber shop. So 150 years ago, not everyone could read, and so different businesses went by different symbols. The color of the water may have been significant, that sometimes the water would be red in those urns if there was an outbreak of a bad disease. If everyone was well, the water was green. Or if they weren't sure, amber for caution, just like our traffic lights. Another thing of interest over here is the dentist drill. It has a foot pedal, and so the dentist would make that go just like a treadle sewing machine, and that went around and around and could drill your teeth. I often say I would want to go to the dentist first thing in the morning because he had plenty of energy to keep that pedal going. By afternoon it might be a little slower, but at any rate I don't think it would be a good experience either way. Okay, so now you're seeing some cells, and the doorway of these cells are very low, and I've often been asked, why are they so small? Well, I've thought of 3 reasons. First, it might be part of security. You couldn't come charging out of there. Secondly, well, they're made out of cast iron. You can see the gates, and that whole box is cast iron, and it would be very heavy. And so it would take a good support under there. We have several of them here, and there's a row up on the second floor just like them. And so maybe they had to keep the size down to keep the weight under control. And also maybe it was the cost. That probably would be the less likely idea, but that's something that people always wonder about. It is very dark in there, even on a bright sunny day like we have right now. If I turn the lights out, it is very dark in there, so it would not be a good place to be at any time. In this area, we have a lot of Civil War things. Chambersburg was occupied 3 times by the Confederates. In 1862, Jeb Stuart came into town and destroyed the railroad shops not far from here. And of course, in 1863, General Lee and A.P. Hill met on the square in Chambersburg, just again 2 blocks from the building here, and made the decision to turn east to Gettysburg. So there were lots and lots of Confederates in the area. And then it was a year later, in 1864 in July, that General McCausland was given orders by Juba Early to come to Chambersburg, declare a ransom, and if that ransom was not met, the town was burned. They could not raise the money, and so the town was destroyed. So the flag that we have here was flying on the square the morning that the town was burned. And this lady's picture that you see here, her family retrieved that flag before things were set on fire and saved that flag. It was in her family until recent years when it was given to us and we have properly restored it. It has just 36 stars. That's how many states there were in 1863. What we have in the hallway here are things pertaining to our railroad. We are in the Cumberland Valley, and the first railroad that came through here was called, of course, the Cumberland Valley Railroad. Later became the Pennsylvania Railroad and has gone through lots of name changes since then. But what we have here on the wall is a relief map that was made in 1912 for the Cumberland Valley Railroad. It shows our valley here about 100 miles, Winchester to the south, which is about 50 miles, and Chambersburg's here in the middle, and at the other end is Harrisburg. And it shows the contour of our mountains in the valley. Our valley is about 25 miles wide, and there's a red line showing the main line of the Cumberland Valley Railroad. It was made for the railroad, and then there's some other zigzag lines that would indicate other railroads that connect to the main line. On the wall, we also have a clock that hung in the railroad station here. It's a Seth Thomas clock, and it still keeps good time. We also have a picture of the Pioneer locomotive. That train still exists. It's owned by the Smithsonian. And it would have run through our valley in, I'm going to say, the 1850s, 1860s. I understand that it was not a real powerful engine, so that probably during the Civil War it was used as a work train. But it definitely went through our valley on the Cumberland Valley Railroad. So we're glad that it still exists. I wish it was back here in Chambersburg. So outside, back of the building, you'll see an exercise yard. So if the prisoners were on good behavior, they were allowed out for exercise. And the big structure that you see down here at the end is the gallows. We're saying that's the original gallows. Well, it's been rebuilt a couple of times, but over the same design and I think using the same hardware. It was used several times for hangings, but we know that the last time it was used was in 1912 when Mr. William Reed was hanged. We have a newspaper article that shows and tells the story of what happened to him or what he did. And he, of course, did die on the gallows. He was the last man that was hanged. We know that there was an execution from Franklin County in the late 1930s, but that man was taken to Harrisburg to the electric chair. He was probably the last person from Franklin County that was executed. As far as what did Mr. William Reed do, well, he killed his ex-girlfriend. Not a good thing. We're in the basement of the 1818 building, and we refer to this as the dungeon. You're going to see several cells, and yes, it's rather spooky down here. And before we had electricity, it would have been very, very dark. We got electricity in Chambersburg in the late 1800s, and so for 80 years it would have been very dark down here. To be incarcerated here or to be working down here, that would have been for 80 years. And so we're going to show you some cells, what they look like. I suppose that probably the very worst prisoners were kept down here in what we call the dungeon. We're inside one of the cells in the dungeon, and in the other cell that you'll probably see, there's a straw tick on the floor, a bucket in the corner. You can figure out what that was for. No plumbing down here in 1818. And also a chain. So embedded into the cement are rings, and you could be chained to the floor. Maybe not all the time, but if they needed to open the door for cleaning or to come in here, they could chain you to the floor. What I'd like for you to see here is some carving we have on the wall. I believe that the man used probably the butt of his knife or fork and tried to carve numbers and letters into the cement wall. And I believe it says 1856. And I believe his name is John. It looks like John, and then it looks like Penward. So I call it John Penward. Don't know anything about him, except that here is the outline of an anchor and stars. So I oftentimes say, sailor went bad. So you can probably guess we're still in the basement of the old part of the building, and we call this the old kitchen. And you can see, here's the fireplace. We've got some cooking utensils here, and this is where the cooking would have been done in those very early years for the inmates. As we said at the beginning, the sheriff and his family lived upstairs, and there was a kitchen up there, and probably the sheriff's wife was the cook down here. So again, if we turned the bright lights out, it's very, very dark here. The fire would make a little bit of light and some candles, but it would not be a fun place to work. We're showing you the cold cellar or the root cellar, which is just right off of the old kitchen that you just saw. This is where probably the fruits and vegetables would have been stored. We didn't have refrigeration back in the 1800s, so it would stay pretty cool in here. We're now in the new part of the building, new being 1880. This part was added on in 1880. You'll see many cells, 3 floors, and this is only half of the building back here. On the other side is the west cell block. And as to how many cells there are, I see there are 12 on this side and probably 12 on the other side as well. By this time there was a heating system and plumbing, and we'll show you some of the crude plumbing, but at least they had a wash bowl and a toilet. And they tell me there's a unique ventilating system back here that works through the chimney. I couldn't begin to explain that, and we certainly can't show you, but there was a way of getting fresh air into this part of the building. But it does get very hot back here, and of course no air conditioning then or now, right now. What was the nickname for the jail? Yeah, I know there were many names, but the sound effect should give you a clue. Oftentimes it was called the slammer, and that's why. When that gate slams, buddy, you've had it. And if you can see here, this again is all cast iron, and this is a pin that goes in that hole. And it's a little tight, but that all goes into place, and a padlock on there. If you notice down here, there's an opening, and that's made a little wider, and so that's where your plate of food could be passed under the gate to you. We're in another part of the basement of the 1880 building, and what I would like you to look for here is the prison art. There's drawings all over this wall, and every time you come down and look at it, you see something you didn't see before. They were quite artistic. We believe that probably the African Americans were incarcerated down here. I suspect they were segregated. We think there are some dates of the 1940s, but hopefully you can see right here we have a skater for one, some calendars, of course, again, where they were stroking off the days till they would get out. But they were quite good artists. We're on the second floor now of the 1818 part of the building, and you'll see another row of cells. You see the doors here, just like the ones below, the ones with the low openings. We're using these now for collection storage, and they are climate controlled and are secured. But over here we have some cases with, again, some things that pertain to the history of Franklin County. We have some muskets, and we have some powder horns. One is actually an animal horn, so I think that's pretty special. We're in the front part of the 1818 building, in a room that's an open room, but there are bars on the windows, so that tells us that there were prisoners. So we're told that probably the juveniles or the lesser offenders were kept in these couple of rooms, probably dormitory style, with bunk beds. They could get lots of people in here. But the sign on the door now says music room. And so this room is full of musical instruments, some of which work. Maybe they don't all work, but some do. And they've all been donated to us because we are the Historical Society. When people want something kept for display purposes, they give it to us, so we accept that if it pertains to Franklin County and if we don't already have that item. Fortunately, we have one here that does work, and I'm going to play that one for you just by turning the handle a few times. You may not be able to see it, but there's a metal disc with holes, just like the paper piano rolls. There's little fingers that play those holes that makes the notes. Beautiful sound, better than stereo today. We're on the second floor of the front of the building. These, as I mentioned, downstairs, the sheriff and his family lived here. So we're right above the living room and the kitchen that you've seen earlier, and these were their bedrooms. And guess what? They were sleeping right across the hall from the inmates. I bet they kept their doors locked at night. So now this is the research library for the Historic Society, and we have folks coming from all over the country to do research on their families back to the 1800s or even further. And so we have a couple of folks here right now from the state of Washington, and that's what they're doing. They're looking for their families and what they can learn about them. I'm standing in the garden outside of the old jail. You can see the stone wall that completely surrounds the building. And I think probably back in those early days of the jail that this probably was a vegetable garden, but now you can see it's beautifully taken care of by our local garden club. And Neil and I want to thank you for joining us today on this quickie tour of the old jail, and we hope that you'll come to Chambersburg and want to take the full tour and see the entire building.